persistence of poverty and inequality, the daily struggle to meet the basic necessities of life, as in availability and accessibility to food, water, electricity, and transport, is a reality for many families across the country. Even today, nearly half or nearly a quarter of South Africa's people experience food poverty. We know that poverty in South Africa has deep roots that emanate from our history. It is the inevitable consequence of centuries of colonial and apartheid, dispossession, exclusion, and humiliation. Apartheid was designed to create islands of privilege in a sea of inequality and poverty and despair. These are the divisions of the past that, through our Constitution, we have made a commitment to eradicate and to heal. In the preamble of our Constitution, we have vowed to improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person who lives in our country. The end of poverty and inequality in our country therefore requires nothing less than the fundamental social and economic transformation of our country. Over the course of the last 30 years, we have set out on the path of transformation. We have made progress on many fronts, but we have also confronted severe constraints and challenges to our development path. Some of these constraints and challenges have arisen from beyond our shores. Some of these challenges include a series of global financial crises, a devastating global pandemic, geopolitical rivalries that impact on trade and competition, and the catastrophic effects of climate change. But many of these constraints and challenges have also arisen here at home. These include state capture and corruption, policy missteps, service delivery failures, and civil unrest. As we work to put these challenges behind us, our focus is on the actions we must take, actions that we must take boldly and with urgency to implement our electoral mandate. Our actions must make a real difference in the lives of our people now. Our actions must also build an inclusive economy that will continue to reduce poverty into the future and ultimately to eradicate it. Since the advent of democracy in our country, we have dedicated great effort and resources towards alleviating poverty and reducing inequality. As we work to rebuild the economy, to create more employment and open opportunities for emerging businesses, we continue to assist the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. We provide various forms of support as a government, and we also provide protection through the social wage. This includes the provision of social grants, free basic services, healthcare, basic education, higher education, social housing, and transport. When we strip out the debt servicing costs that we pay for our debt, around 60% of government's budget is spent on the social wage. The funds we spend on social support and protection are not funds that we can say are wasted. They make a real difference in people's lives and improve their prospects for a better future. The results of the 2022 census show the impact of these social policies. Households that are today living in formal houses increased to 89% in 2022, a huge increase from 65% in 1996. 8 out of 10 South Africans now have access to piped water at home or in their yards. 90% of people have access to electricity, up from 58% in 1996. A vital part of the effort to reduce the cost of living is the provision of free basic minimum services to indigent households. Now, through this program, millions of indigent people in our country have been able to access basic needs like electricity and water. Yet we know that this program is not reaching all the people that it should. It is estimated, for example, that around 10 million poor households qualify for free basic electricity, but it only reaches about 2.3 million households. While the provision of such services to indigent households is funded by the national fiscus, these resources are either poorly managed by our municipalities or they are misdirected to other local council expenditures. This is one instance where the weaknesses in local government have a direct bearing on the quality of life of the poorest in our society. It is one of the reasons that we are working to ensure that we have effective local government as part of our efforts to build a capable state. Social grants remain a lifeline to millions of people in our country, particularly children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. The introduction of the SRD grant during COVID-19 has provided much-needed relief to more than 11 million unemployed people at its peak. Today, around a half of all households in South Africa benefit from social grants. Studies have shown that the child support grant has a positive impact on children's nutrition, their health, school attendance, and educational outcomes. Although there are some weaknesses in the system, it is quite impressive that the state provides direct financial support to some 28 million beneficiaries in our country every month without fail. But we must also recognize that this is not a desirable nor a sustainable situation. While there will always be people who need support, such as the elderly, children, and persons with disabilities, our aim must be to steadily move as many social grant recipients as possible into sustainable livelihoods, where they will be able to take care of themselves and their children and households. Chairperson, food is amongst the most basic of human needs. Yet nearly a quarter of households consider their access to food as inadequate or severely inadequate. While the steep rise in food inflation since the COVID pandemic has eased over the last few months, consumers are yet to feel the effects in their own pockets. Among the measures to ensure that all South Africans have affordable access to sufficient food, government is looking at whether the basket of food items that is exempt from VAT could be expanded to include more basic products. Another important area is the expansion of the country's agricultural output. This requires more effective land redistribution and provision of support that is needed by beneficiaries who get land so that they can work the land. We have seen how financial support to small-scale farmers in recent years has significantly increased the cultivation of land. Many South Africans get their food from spaza shops and informal traders, and these outlets are an important part of township and rural economies. They provide residents with convenience and with value. However, the recent spate of foodborne illnesses has highlighted the risks that are associated with these enterprises. The tragic deaths of a number of children after eating food bought from some of these outlets has required urgent and decisive action to prevent the contamination of food by harmful substances, particularly pesticides, that are being sold unlawfully. Since we announced a range of measures 2 weeks ago, multidisciplinary teams have been conducting inspections of spaza shops across the country. Nearly 200,000 spaza shops have been visited. More than 1,000 spaza shops, supermarkets, and warehouses have had to be closed down. Large quantities of goods have been confiscated and numerous fines have been levied and issued for violations of bylaws. Poverty in South Africa is also a consequence of where our people live. Our cities and towns were designed by the apartheid planners to keep black people at a distance from the centers of economic activity and social services. This has created spatial inequality that we have not yet been able to overcome. One of the consequences of this situation is that millions of South Africans, especially the poor, as well as the working class, spend a large portion of their income on transport costs. Studies suggest that poor households can spend more than a third of their income just on transport. The work that has been done over the last few years to restore the key commuter train corridors to full operation is a vital part of efforts to reduce the cost of living. Surveys by Stats SA have shown that trains are the least expensive mode of transport in our country. In 2020, the cost of train travel, was around 40% less than by minibus, taxi, or 27% less than by bus. Another challenge we have had to confront is energy poverty. We've been doing quite a lot of work across almost all municipalities in this regard. Between 80 and 100% of households have electricity, yet we have struggled for more than a decade to produce enough electricity to meet demand, which resulted in crippling load shedding. The cost of building new generation capacity, combined with the effects of state capture and mismanagement, has contributed to a steady rise in the cost of electricity for many consumers. Even now, NERSA is considering an application from Eskom for tariff increases that will put a further strain on households and businesses. It is vital that we settle on a tariff path that does enable Eskom to achieve financial sustainability while not placing an undue burden on consumers of electricity. We have embarked on far-reaching reforms of the electricity sector that will establish a competitive electricity market, and this will improve energy security and lower the cost of electricity as well. Improving access to quality health care is central to our efforts to tackle poverty. A healthier nation is a more productive nation. As government, we have prioritized the strengthening of primary health care. This is an important part of the progressive implementation of the National Insurance, which will give all South Africans equal access to quality health care, regardless of their ability to pay. The work that is underway to implement the NHI includes the upgrading and expansion of public health facilities and the training of qualified and capable personnel. Education is ultimately the most powerful instrument we have to end poverty. By investing in the skills as well as the capabilities of young people, we will be able to break the cycle of poverty that is handed down in our country from one generation to the next. We have done much to make education accessible and affordable to all, including through no-fee schools and the funding for tertiary students from poor and working-class backgrounds. Almost 90% of all learners in the public education system attend no-fee schools. The number of students benefiting from NSFAS rose from around 40,000 in the early years of democracy to over 780,000 last year. We are now focused on achieving universal access for all children to early childhood development facilities. This is essential to prepare them for school and set them up to be successful in life. In basic education, we have prioritized improvements in reading as well as in mathematics. Due to our past, millions of South Africans experience asset poverty. They do not own land or houses or other assets that can be used to raise capital, to start a business, or even to hand on the assets to the next generation. We have started to address the challenge of asset poverty through our land reform programs and the provision of subsidized housing. If you were just to calculate the value of the houses that have been handed down to about 4 million South Africans, on a straight line calculation of average value, if every one of the houses today are worth 100,000 Rand, it means that we have handed down about 400 billion Rand in value to the people of our country, numbering about 4 million. in the form of houses. While the state has provided houses to millions of South Africans since 1994, many people do not have title deeds to some of these houses. We're working to remove the backlog of title deeds for subsidized housing and reform the system of title deeds to make it more affordable as well as accessible. Crime and violence and corruption make people poorer. They make communities live in fear. In recent years, we have focused on putting more boots on the ground through the recruitment of police personnel. In this administration, the South African Police Service will implement a more data-driven approach to target violent crime hotspots as well as to direct resources accordingly. The South African Police Service, through more effective policing, will continue to work with communities through community policing forums to promote the role of citizens in reducing crime. One of the most pervasive and vicious forms of crime in South Africa is the violence that is perpetrated against the women of our country by men through the National Strategic Plan Against Gender-Based Violence. We are continuing to strengthen the response of the criminal justice system, providing better support for survivors of gender-based violence, and reducing the vulnerability of women through improving their economic position as well. We are also undertaking programs of prevention, working together with men and boys in particular to address the attitudes and practices that contribute to gender-based violence. On Monday, we joined people around the world in marking the start of the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. And we continue to call on all South Africans to become involved and raise awareness about this scourge and what we need to do to end gender-based violence in our country. Chairperson, while the number of people in employment has doubled over the last 30 years, this has not kept pace with the number of people who join the workforce each year. More than 11 million people in our country are currently unemployed because there can be no job creation without growth. We have placed inclusive economic growth at the center of the work that the Government of National Unity has to do. We are pursuing far-reaching economic reforms to make the economy of our country more competitive so that we can enable greater growth. There is now significant momentum to our reforms in strategic network industries like electricity, water, telecommunications, and rail, as well as our ports. In this administration, we are focusing on reforming also the local government system and improving the delivery of basic services. We are expanding investment in infrastructure because infrastructure is the flywheel that contributes to the growth of the economy. Because it stimulates activity in the construction and related industries, it also provides the networks and facilities that allow for the production and distribution of raw materials, manufactured goods, data, electricity, water, and other essentials that function to grow the economy. We have seen the impact of on people's lives, of new roads and bridges in rural areas, of new clinics and hospitals, of new schools and colleges, of water schemes and new housing projects. Much work still needs to be done to improve the roads in our country, to build more schools, and to upgrade the various public infrastructure that we have. Over the last 4 years, major projects have been completed in areas such as transport, water and sanitation, energy, human settlements, and student accommodation. Another 82 strategic integrated projects with a combined value of 436 billion rand are currently in construction. The problem of unemployment is most severe amongst young people. To address this, government established the SA Youth Mobi platform for young people to find opportunities for employment, training, and development. More than 4 million young people participate in this and have flighted their own profiles, and many of them are getting positive responses as employers utilize that platform to find those that they would employ in their companies. Other initiatives include pay for performance programs that link training to employment opportunities. The revitalized National Youth Service involves young people in different fields of work in the social sector and the community sector. The presidential employment stimulus has created earning opportunities for more than 2 million participants. Around 84% of participants are young people. Government itself is increasing support for small businesses and entrepreneurs across the spectrum, from informal enterprises to high-growth, high-tech startups as well. To unlock growth in informal employment, government is working to ease restrictions on informal trading, reducing the cost of trading, and expanding opportunities to small businesses by providing guarantees and first loss funding. One of the pillars of our response to gender-based violence is economic empowerment of women. At the same time, improving the economic position of women is a critical part of reducing poverty and inequality, as well as unleashing the potential of our economy. One of the initiatives to empower women is the Women Economic Assembly, which has done a great deal of good work to incorporate women-owned businesses into established business value chains in both the private and the public sector. The Women Economic Empowerment Program has now trained some 10,000 women businesses to secure procurement from government and the private sector as well. As we pursue inclusive growth in our economy, we need to be increasingly seeking opportunities elsewhere on our continent. As the African Continental Free Trade Area gains momentum, our companies need to expand their presence in the huge continental market that is being formed on our continent. On this Sunday, the 1st of December, South Africa will be taking over the presidency of the G20 group of countries. Together, these countries account for 75% of the world's trade and 85% of global GDP. So this is an important forum that South Africa is privileged to be leading from December for the whole year, before we hand over to the United States of America. We will use our presidency to bring the development priorities of the African continent and the Global South more firmly onto the agenda of the G20. Through our G20 presidency, we will focus on the theme solidarity, equality, and sustainability. We will call on the members of the G20 to stand in solidarity with those people who are facing hardship, poverty, and conflict. We will work to tackle inequality through fair and consistent trade rules, improved debt relief mechanisms, and increased funding for climate actions and development. We aim to strengthen the commitment of all countries to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The G20 presidency is also an opportunity to present to the world the great opportunities and experiences that South Africa has to offer. This whole process of the G20 will involve up to 230 summits leading up to the Leaders' Summit later in 2025, which will take place in Johannesburg in Gauteng. Arising from the elections in May, the Government of National Unity has been working with other formations in society towards convening a national dialogue. The national dialogue will encourage the participation of all South Africans as individuals, as well as in their various formations, to tackle the challenges that confront our country. This dialogue will need to address the persistence of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. The dialogue will seek to forge a new social compact on the action that is required by all members of society to achieve the vision of the National Development Plan. In closing, Madam Chairperson, I wish to recall the words of our founding democracy president, Nelson Mandela, who said, talking about making poverty history, he said, like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is a man-made phenomenon, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. There are moments when the depth of poverty in our country may lead us to despair. Poverty reduces any person's dignity. Poverty, unemployment, and inequality are so perverse and so persistent that we sometimes fear we may never overcome them. And yet, we overcame apartheid. We overcame slavery and colonialism. Through our collective actions, we will be able to end poverty in our country as well. Together, we will be able to achieve a more just, more equal society in which all South Africans can be able to share in the wealth of our country. We can achieve a society in which no one is left behind. This, Honorable Chairperson, is achievable and can be attained if we all work together in a common effort and commitment to end poverty and give our people a better life. It is our responsibility as leaders of our country. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. When you opened the House in this first administration of the 7th administration, you did indicate that one amongst your priorities is issue of tackling poverty within our communities. And indeed, we are delighted today as this House that you did came back and give account on the work that has been done by government up to thus far to precisely deal with the issue of poverty as well as the high cost of living. We really appreciate that, Honorable President. Having said that, we will now move on to the next speaker, which is the Chief Whip of the NCOP, Honorable Moemang. Please take the podium.